Welcome to this second production podcast for our theatrical project Under Katyń, which opens on the 11th of July 2023 at the beautiful Bear Pit Theatre in Stratford upon Avon. A production which is proud to be supported by the Polish Cultural Institute, by the Stratford Town Trust, and is produced by Copernicana CIC and by First Light Theatre. I want to credit all of those supporters because it underlines the community nature of this endeavour. Indeed, one might say the European nature of this endeavour. In this podcast, I'd like to introduce you to Witold Kępiński, who is the grandson of a cavalry officer who was murdered at Katyń in 1940. Thank you, Witold, for sharing with us some of your grandfather's story and some of what it means to live in the modern age with this history in your present. I found this an extraordinarily helpful conversation. And without further ado, may I present to you my new friend and friend to our production, Witold Kępiński.
So kind of for me, story Katyń is my grandfather was murdered at Katyń. So he was called same name as me, actually, Witold Kępiński. And I kind of have an unusual story in the sense that I'm probably quite young to have a grandfather that age, because my father was 60 when I was born. And he was also in the Polish cavalry during the war. My grandfather was an eye specialist, an eye doctor, and an officer in the Polish army, and hence why he was one of the people targeted at Katyń. And so for me, in terms of what Katyń means for me now, because obviously I never had a chance to know my grandfather. However, because there's a big age gap, the likelihood is I probably would have never really known my grandfather, as my grandmother died when I was very young. So I guess in terms of what Katyń means for me, there's the memory of what it is and what happened is kind of very important, and it's part of my history, my family's history. But in terms of how I feel it kind of impacted me was much more about how it impacted my father. Because for him, first of all, he actually tried to go and find his father in Russia. So before knowing what actually happened in Katyń, and the Katyń that happened, he actually went into Russia to try and find him. Ended up getting captured, and eventually sentenced to a time in a gulag in Siberia, from which he escaped, and eventually, at the end of the war, he moved over to the UK. So with my aunt, so his brother, his sister, and their mother. So they all lived in the UK for a short time before my aunt emigrated to South Africa. My uncle emigrated to California. And my grandmother moved to South Africa as well, my aunt. So kind of family went a bit everywhere. So it's also a story of kind of immigration as well. And and what that kind of period did. But in terms of how it kind of impacted my father, I guess it's the impact of the war in general on top of what happened in Katyń, which was very much around the fact it made him tough. It kind of gave him a toughness because of having to deal with everything that happened. But also from a young age, it kind of gave me quite a sense of mortality, because from a young age, I knew about Katyń and what happened to my grandfather, and that's an unusual thing to have to process at a young age. But it was kind of important for me to know about it. I think it was important for my father to tell me about it, not for me to kind of find out when I got a bit older. I think it was important for me to know about it. But also it's kind of, now it's an important part of Polish history of that period. And so I kind of feel it's important for it to be remembered, but it's also, for me, it's interesting to see how it's remembered as well, because, for instance, I went back to Poland a few years ago, and I went to where we had, so we family was based in Warsaw, but also in Western Poland we had like a holiday home, and I went to visit that place and actually met up with the mayor of the town, and also speaking to people. They actually had sort of knew about my family and especially my grandfather, because at school they're taught about Katyń, and so for them it was interesting to meet me, because actually I'm kind of part of that story because through my family. So it was kind of nice to make that connection in that way, as in that way. So yeah, I think it's, for me, Katyń, it's important to remember it, especially I think at the moment it's become much more significant, because it kind of feels to a certain extent that history is starting to repeat itself, and also the fact that I think what my father found difficult was the denial of it. It was 50 years of more than 50 years of denial that it ever happened, or not that it didn't happen, but who instigated it, and the fact that he had to sort of, he found it difficult to deal with that, because there wasn't an admission of guilt. It was always blamed on the people who didn't commit it for a long time, and that I think made it hard for it to go away, to try and to move forward from it. And I think what Gorbachev did in the 90s was an important part of trying to move on from that. However, what's happening now with the fact that some of the memorials are being taken down and history's being blurred regarding it, I think for me it's still important to make sure that we talk about what really happened, because actually if people are trying to rewrite history, and we're not just finding it about Katyń, but other things also are trying to change the narrative of parts of history. Actually, it's important to make sure that the truth is still told. So, yeah, I think for me, I think that's why it still has some resonance now, and also why, and also as a kind of, to show that whilst what they tried to do with Katyń was sort of wipe out Polish intelligentsia, actually there is a resilience that will mean that a country will bounce back. Eventually, time will mean that it will bounce back from a horrible event like that, and I think it's an important lesson to show that no matter what you do try and do, that actually there is a path through, and with time as well, with what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. Yeah, things the country will rebound from the terrible events.